This is the story of an Omega secretary who was ready to quit, but ended up locked in an underground panic room with his ice-cold CEO boss and the boss's little son while a city riot swallowed the streets above and old secrets crawled out of the dark. Don't forget to support the channel with a like and subscribe so you don't miss new Forbidden BL stories. And tell me what city you're watching from. Evan Hale had rewritten his resignation 3 times, and every version sounded like a stranger pretending to be him. The words were polished, harmless, almost kind. They turned fatigue into growth, turned fear into transition, turned a quiet unraveling into a clean paragraph with a grateful closing line. He kept the final draft open on his laptop until the building's lights switched to night mode, then hovered over the send button as if it were a trap. Each time, he closed the lid instead. It felt safer to leave the ending unwritten. An unsent email was still a door that had not fully opened. He lived in a narrow studio that smelled faintly of detergent and cheap suppressant wipes. The air purifier on the shelf ran all night, its soft hum competing with the city's distant traffic. He set alarms to remind himself to take suppressants at precise intervals, the way some people set alarms for prayer. The routine was a cage he built for himself, because the alternative was worse. An Omega scent slipping in a corporate tower was not a mistake. It was an invitation for cruelty disguised as concern, for proximity disguised as accident. Cross and Vale, Capital marketed itself as modern and clean. Their internal emails promised equality, professionalism, zero tolerance, but elevators still remembered biology. Conference rooms still rewarded dominance. Assistants still smiled too brightly when they caught even the smallest change in air. Evan learned to read micro-reactions like weather. A pause half a second too long. A chair angled closer than necessary. A glance at his throat as if his pulse were a document. He learned to keep his posture neutral, his hands still, his voice steady. He learned to become forgettable without becoming invisible, because invisible people got stepped on. In 2 years, he became excellent at running Damien Cross's life with the precision of a machine, because the machine at the center demanded it. Damien never shouted. He never had to. His silence carried weight, a controlled emptiness that made people fill it with compliance. He could freeze a room with a look and make even senior executives rearrange their priorities without being told. He moved through the building like a law of physics. You adjusted around him or you broke. Evan knew his calendar better than his own body. Flights scheduled with no margin. Negotiations that stretched into midnight, meetings labeled security review that never appeared in any department's records. And a recurring block that appeared every evening at the same exact time, a single letter that seemed absurdly small for how protected it was. Damien vanished into the restricted lower levels for that block and returned as if he had walked through pressure. Not bruised, not shaken, just subtly altered. A shade paler, a jaw set a little harder, a faint tightening around the eyes like someone had held their breath too long. Evan had noticed it the first month and stopped noticing it out loud after that. In Cross and Vale, questions were a currency, and he did not have enough to spend. He planned his resignation in the same way he planned everything else, quietly, carefully, with contingencies. He cleaned his inbox in small batches. He moved personal files off the company drive. He copied down contacts he might need, then deleted the list. He imagined a clean exit where Damien signed the release forms, nodded once, and never thought of him again. Evan knew that fantasy was a coping mechanism, but he kept it anyway. People survived on stories when reality offered nothing gentle. The morning the riot began, it didn't look like a riot. It looked like rumor. A strike somewhere on the west side, a protest that would probably dissolve by afternoon, a market whisper about layoffs in manufacturing, and an executive bonus plan that had leaked online. It traveled fast, carried by live streams and clipped headlines, multiplying with every retelling until the city felt restless, as if it could no longer hold its own anger. By early afternoon, the sirens became constant, not one at a time, but layers overlapping like waves. Security notifications popped up on every screen in the building. Advisories told staff to leave early, to avoid certain streets, to stay off public transit. The kind of message that pretended it was a suggestion when it was really a warning. Evan stayed. Secretaries stayed. Support staff stayed because there was always one more document to file, one more schedule to rearrange, one more problem to absorb so executives could leave clean. He watched people in tailored coats rush for elevators with tense smiles, watched assistants clutch laptops like life rafts, watched the building pretend to be calm by increasing the brightness of the lobby lights. Damien stayed too, which was not normal. When people whispered about him, they said he always left before danger became inconvenience. He made contingency plans the way other people made coffee. Yet that afternoon, he remained in his office, reviewing documents as if the city outside were only noise. Evan stood near the side table, flipping through the last stack of sign-offs, the scent of paper and toner mixing with the faint antiseptic smell of his own suppressant patch. He kept his face composed. He kept his heart from showing itself. The glass wall behind Damien's desk reflected the skyline in fractured pieces, and beyond it, the street far below was beginning to clog with movement. The first impact did not sound like an explosion. It was uglier than that. It was the heavy, blunt crash of something large colliding with the building's front facade. The glass trembled in its frame. A lamp on the credenza shivered. Somewhere down in the lobby, an alarm tried to start and then cut off like a throat being squeezed. Evan's body reacted before his mind did. A sharp inhale, a pulse spike, a sudden awareness of how close he was to an alpha who never lost control. He expected Damien to flinch, expected anger, expected an order. Damien did nothing. He lifted his eyes from the page with the calm of someone watching numbers change on a screen. The city could scream itself raw, and he would still finish reading the sentence. That quiet made Evan's fear sharper because it wasn't normal calm. It was the calm of a man who had already calculated the outcome. Then, Damien's phone buzzed on the desk, short and precise. Evan saw the screen in the reflection of the desk lamp, a single character glowing like a signal flare. See, Damien's posture changed instantly. Not panic, not hurry, just a sudden precision, as if a switch had flipped inside him. His chair pushed back without scraping the floor. He stood, straightening his cuffs, and for the first time that day, he looked past the documents and into reality. Evan's mouth went dry. He did not ask what it meant. He did not ask where they were going. He had trained himself not to ask. He had trained himself to follow. Damien moved toward the door with that same controlled pace, and Evan followed because obedience was muscle memory now. In the hallway outside, the building felt different. The air seemed tighter, charged with distant shouting and the metallic taste of emergency power. Somewhere far below, a crowd surged like a living thing. Damien glanced back once, not with warmth, not with reassurance, but with command sharpened into a single motion. The message was simple and unavoidable. Come, Evan obeyed, because that was what he had built his survival on. He just did not know that the next door Damien opened would lead to a lock designed for war, and that once it closed behind them, Evan's resignation draft would stop being a plan and become a relic of a life that no longer existed. The executive hallway was too quiet for a city that was coming apart. The riot existed only as distant vibration, a faint tremor beneath the building's polished calm. Thick carpet drank the sound of footsteps. The walls were lined with muted art that looked like it had never witnessed anything human. Even the air felt curated, carrying expensive wood polish and the cold metallic edge of central filtration. Evan walked half a step behind Damien Cross, as he always did. It was a habit trained into him by months of reading the CEO's pace and posture like a living calendar. His heart kept trying to sprint, but his body had learned that panic was a luxury. He kept his hands still at his sides. He kept his eyes down. He kept his breathing shallow enough that his suppressants would not have to fight too hard. Damien moved fast without looking hurried. Speed, for him, was not emotion. It was a setting. He did not glance at the windows. He did not check the hallway cameras. He did not acknowledge the muffled chaos pressing against the building's skin. If anything reached him, it was absorbed and turned into a decision. They passed doors Evan recognized and doors he did not. The further they went, the more the corridor changed in small, deliberate ways. Fewer nameplates, fewer decorative objects, the lighting colder, the security panels more subtle, integrated into the walls like scars that had healed clean. Evan realized he was being guided not only away from danger, but away from witnesses. Damien stopped at a door Evan had walked past countless times without ever seeing it. It looked like a plain access closet with a brushed metal handle and a generic fire code sticker. It should have been meaningless, yet the space around it felt denser, as if the building held its breath here. Beside the handle was a keypad with no labels, no brand, no light. Dead plastic until Damien pressed his thumb against a small square of glass. The scanner woke instantly, a quiet blue glow that made Evan's skin tighten. Damien entered a code that changed too quickly for Evan to catch, his fingers moving with the calm precision of a man who had typed it during emergencies before. The lock disengaged with a soft mechanical sigh. Inside was not a closet. It was a narrow private lift with reinforced walls, the kind of elevator you only built if you expected someone to come for you. The interior smelled filtered and metallic, colder than the hallway, as if it lived in a different climate. A red emergency handset hung beside the control panel, the kind used in facilities that planned for worst-case scenarios. The buttons were unlabeled, only numbers and a single symbol that looked like a small shield. Evan's stomach tightened when Damien pressed the shield. The elevator doors sealed with a heavier sound than standard mechanisms, and then the cabin moved down, not one floor, not two. It kept descending. Evan felt it in his ears first, the pressure shifting like they were diving underwater. The familiar architecture of the building should have ended after parking and storage. Yet the elevator continued past that invisible boundary, traveling into space that did not belong to any public blueprint. Evan's mind tried to reject the sensation as impossible, but the numbers on the small internal display kept changing. The descent kept going. The air grew cooler, drier, more antiseptic. Somewhere above them, the city was cracking open, sirens and bodies and anger colliding with glass. Down here, everything was designed to keep that chaos out, as if the world above was an inconvenience that could be sealed behind steel. Damien's phone buzzed again in the tight space. The sound was sharp, intimate. Evan caught the message in the reflection of the elevator's brushed metal wall, a brief flash of text before Damien's hand covered it. 2 words were enough. He's here. Damien's jaw tightened in a way Evan had never seen in a meeting room. Not anger, not irritation, a moment of something closer to fear, immediately buried under control. For the first time, Evan wondered if Damien was not going down to hide from the riot at all. He was going down because the riot had forced a timing he did not want. The elevator stopped with a gentle deceleration that felt wrong, too smooth for how deep they had traveled. The doors slid open, and the air outside carried the faint smell of antiseptic laid over metal, like a hospital corridor built inside a vault. What waited beyond did not look like corporate infrastructure. Matte gray walls ran clean and seamless, with doors that had no handles, only access panels. The ceiling was full of vents that hummed with constant filtered air. Cameras sat in corners with no blinking lights, watching without the comfort of being noticed. There were no windows, no decorative touches, no signs meant for human reassurance. Evan's delayed horror arrived slowly, like a bruise blooming under skin. He had walked into something the company did not merely hide from employees. It hid from the world. Damien moved with certainty, turning once, then twice, navigating turns that felt rehearsed. He stopped at a door marked with a single letter on a small plaque. The letter was ordinary. The door was not. It was thicker than it should have been, fitted with a locking system that looked like it belonged to a secure government facility, not the basement of an investment firm. Damien placed his palm against a scanner. The door released with a muted thud. He pushed it open, and Evan stepped in behind him. The room inside was not an office. It was a security chamber. Reinforced walls, a steel door with multiple locks, a control panel tied into an internal generator, water storage stacked with clinical neatness, and a medical kit sealed in plastic as if it had never been used, only replaced. A long bench was built into one wall, a small table fixed to the floor, and a screen showing exterior camera feeds like a silent surveillance altar. And in the far corner, sitting on the bench with his knees pulled close, was a child. He was small enough that his feet did not touch the floor. His hair was dark and slightly messy, as if nervous hands had pushed through it over and over. His eyes were too alert for his age, watching the door like he expected it to betray him. He clutched a soft toy that looked new and expensive, yet worn in the places a child's fingers return to when fear squeezed tight. Evan had never seen Damien's son in person. The rumors existed like dust in the company's corners. A child, a private matter, a complication. Most staff pretended not to know because Cross and Vale punished curiosity with silence and distance could destroy a career faster than mistakes. The boy looked up when Damien entered. He did not smile. He did not run. He did not cry. He simply exhaled, as if he had been holding air inside his chest for too long and had finally been given permission to let it go. Damien crossed the room immediately. He placed his hand on the child's head, not gentle, not harsh, just present, like checking a vital sign. The gesture was so quiet it almost didn't register as tenderness, yet it was the most human movement Evan had ever seen from him. Evan remained near the door, frozen by the sudden weight of his own body. He became aware of his scent, of the thin sweat under his collar, of the way suppressants fought stress like a failing wall. He wasn't supposed to be here. He wasn't supposed to see this. This room was not meant for him, and the child certainly wasn't meant to be witnessed by an Omega secretary who had been drafting his resignation in secret. On the wall screen, the lobby camera showed a surge of bodies pressing against the glass. Security barriers bent, smoke curled in from somewhere outside, faint gray snakes in the bright lobby light. The city above looked like a mouth opening wider, hungry. Damien's hand moved to the door controls. The steel door shut. The sound was not a simple close, it was a seal. The first lock engaged with a heavy click, then another, Each one was separate, deliberate, a sequence designed to outlast panic, fire, and force. The clicks sounded like promises and warnings at the same time. Leo's shoulders lowered by a fraction when the last lock engaged, as if the steel itself was a lullaby he had learned to trust. Evan's throat tightened. They were sealed underground while the city burned above, and Evan understood with cold clarity that he had just become a witness to the most protected secret in Damien Cross's life. A secret that was not only personal, but strategic. A child in a panic room meant threats no memo would ever name. For a moment, Evan's mind returned to his unsent resignation draft, sitting on his laptop like a quiet lie. It had promised a clean exit. This door did not open for clean exits, and when it locked, the sound of steel made one truth unavoidable. There were people in this world who would kill to keep a child unseen. And now, Evan had seen him. Minutes stretched until they stopped behaving like minutes. In the panic room, time thickened into something heavy and slow, like air turned to syrup. The climate system kept everything stable on purpose, cool, dry, sterile. It was the kind of controlled environment meant to prevent panic by refusing to acknowledge it. The only sign that the world was collapsing above them came from the wall screen, where the lobby cameras showed silent violence in bright corporate lighting. People ran across the marble floor in frantic clusters, bodies colliding, arms raised, faces turned into blur by motion and distance, glass shattered without sound, scattering like ice across the polished entrance. Flashing lights stuttered across the frame, white and blue, then sudden darkness when a camera feed cut out. The building's soundproofing made the riot feel unreal, like a nightmare with the volume turned down. The city looked as if it were drowning behind glass. Evan forced himself to do what he always did when fear tried to take his breath. He searched for procedure. He moved his attention to what could be measured, the water storage crates stacked with clinical neatness, the emergency blanket sealed in plastic, the medical kit with its unbroken tamper strip, the generator panel, its status light steady and indifferent. He counted supplies in his head like counting could anchor him to the floor. How long the water would last, how many ration packs, whether the room had a secondary air filter, whether the emergency handset would work without external network support. It was the same coping mechanism that had kept him alive in other storms. Inventory made chaos smaller. Damien Cross moved with controlled efficiency that bordered on ritual. He checked each lock in the steel door, hand resting for a fraction of a second on the mechanism as if listening through it. He tested the ventilation panel, ran a fingertip along the seam, checked the indicator lights. He keyed the internal comm system, waited, and keyed it again with the patience of someone who understood how systems failed under pressure. He did not look at Evan, not directly. The lack of eye contact did not feel like anger. It felt like calculation. Evan could almost sense Damien deciding what category to place him in: liability, tool, witness, threat. The CEO's silence was not absence. It was evaluation. The child watched everything without moving much. His name came back to Evan with the unpleasant clarity of a detail you should not know. Leo. 6 years old, if the calendar invite Evan had once glimpsed had been accurate. Too young for the stillness in his posture, too young for the way his eyes tracked the camera feeds as if he recognized the shapes of danger. Leo did not ask why Evan was in the room. He did not demand comfort. He did not cry. He simply held his soft toy in his lap and observed, absorbing the atmosphere the way a child learned to survive in a house where emotions were treated like explosives. Evan's fingers tightened around the strap of his messenger bag until the material creaked. Beneath files in a small tablet, he had a printed copy of his resignation letter, folded once, then twice. It was an absurd object now, paper pretending to be control. He had planned to leave quietly, to disappear before the company swallowed him completely, to become another efficient exit from another corporate story. Now he was locked in a steel room with the man who owned his time and the child who was that man's true vulnerability. Damien finally spoke, and the sound of his voice in the sealed room felt sharper than usual, like a blade drawn slowly from a sheath. External security had been compromised. The riot had shifted from protest to breach. There were credible threats targeting high-profile executives. Evacuation routes were unsafe. They would remain here until private security cleared an extraction corridor. It was not an invitation. It was a sentence. The kind of statement that became true simply because Damien said it in that tone. Evan nodded because nodding kept him alive. It signaled compliance. It signaled he understood his place. It kept Damien from needing to decide anything about him right away. The hours dragged, measured only by the camera feeds changing, the generator hum staying constant, and Leo's stillness becoming something unsettling. Most children would have broken by now. They would have cried or asked questions or demanded reassurance. Leo did none of those things. He sat with his toy and watched the screens like a small witness at a trial. When the lobby feed showed a group turning toward the elevator bank, Leo's fingers tightened until the toy's fabric puckered. When a security camera caught a guard going down hard, shoulder-striking tile, Leo's throat moved as if swallowing something sharp. He did not make a sound, but his body responded in small tells. A stiffening of the back, a shallow breath held too long, the tiniest flinch when a feed blinked out. Evan noticed something else too, and it made his suppressants feel suddenly thin. Leo's scent was faint, not fully formed, but distinct. Alpha-leaning, a subtle sharpness beneath the room's artificial cleanliness, like cold metal left in the sun. It was not strong enough to dominate the air, but in a sealed room, even a hint became meaningful. Evan felt it press against his nerves, a reminder that biology did not care about corporate policy. Damien noticed as well. His posture shifted almost imperceptibly, protective without looking soft. His whole body angled a fraction closer to Leo, as if he could block unseen threats with the placement of his shoulders. Evan's own body betrayed him in quiet ways. A tremor in his fingers that he forced to still, a faint sweat under his collar that he tried to ignore, a heartbeat that refused to settle into normal rhythm. Under all of it, there was the constant low panic of an Omega who had learned, early and painfully, that being trapped with a powerful Alpha could turn dangerous even if no one raised a hand. Damien's gaze flicked to him at last. A brief assessment, sharp and cold. Evan held the look and forced calm onto his face like a mask. He kept his scent as flat as he could. He kept his posture respectful, not defensive. He did not give Damien any excuse to interpret him as a problem. Leo's eyes moved between them. In that silent triangle, something shifted. Evan felt it not as a dramatic moment, but as a change in pressure, like a door seal tightening. Damien was not only assessing his secretary anymore. He was watching his son's reactions. He was measuring, in real time, what Leo noticed and how Leo responded. And Leo was studying Evan as if deciding whether Evan belonged to the category of safe. It was not affection. It was survival logic. The riot above had forced them into proximity, but the true tension in the room came from what the locked door made inevitable. When people were sealed together, roles bled, masks slipped. The rules that usually held secrets in place began to weaken. Family secrets did not survive locked doors, and as the silent footage of chaos flickered on the wall, Evan understood with cold clarity that the panic room was not just a shelter from the riot. It was a chamber where the truth would have to breathe, whether Damien wanted it to or not. The room had rules long before anyone spoke them. They lived in the angles of Damien Cross's shoulders, in the way Leo kept his knees pulled close, in the sterile steadiness of the air. No raised voices, no unnecessary movement, no wasted supplies, no emotional mess on the floor where someone could trip over it. Damien ran the panic room the same way he ran a board meeting. Efficiency, control, minimal expression. Even fear was expected to file itself neatly and wait its turn. Evan learned the rules by watching. The steel door remained shut, its lock light steady, and Damien treated it like a boundary the world could not cross if the right procedures were followed. He checked each bolt again, fingertips briefly pressing metal as if listening through it. He verified the ventilation panel and the pressure gauge, then moved to the small control console and keyed in status checks with the calm focus of someone who had done this before. The panic room was built for long stays. Evan discovered it in fragments because the space revealed itself like a secret that didn't want to be seen. A sliding wall panel hid a compact bathroom with a sink, a toilet, and sealed hygiene packs stacked in tidy rows. A kitchenette the size of a closet held ration packs and bottled water arranged by expiration date. A cot folded into the wall with a mechanism that locked into place like military hardware. Emergency blankets, still wrapped in plastic, were stored beside a small heater unit that could run on internal power. The medical cabinet was locked and labeled with codes Evan didn't recognize. Not the company's standard safety labels. Something colder. Something that belonged to private security and quiet disasters. And then he saw it. A thin children's blanket folded neatly on the bench, clean and soft against the room's clinical geometry. It was the kind of detail you included only if you expected a child to be here more than once. That blanket tightened something in Evan's chest. This was not a one-time crisis. This room had been part of Leo's world, a place where a child learned to sit quietly and wait behind steel while adults handled threats that never belonged to him. Escape routes and lockdown protocols weren't abstract concepts here. They were woven into the fabric of Leo's normal. Damien checked his phone again and again. Underground signal came and went like a weak pulse. When it connected, messages appeared in clipped fragments, stripped of emotion. Names, locations, status updates. Evan caught pieces when Damien's screen flashed in the dim reflection of the monitor. North stairwell compromised, lobby lost, riot shifting east, extraction delayed. Delayed meant time. Time inside a sealed room meant friction, even if no one touched. Evan took the far end of the bench and made his body smaller on purpose. Distance was a form of respect and a form of safety. He did not want Damien to think he was stepping into private territory. He did not want Leo to smell fear on him, to associate his scent with instability. He did not want his own nervous system to betray him, to flare and soften and react to the proximity of an alpha and a child who carried alpha-leaning sharpness in his half-formed scent. But invisibility was harder in a space this small. The longer they stayed, the more Evan felt Leo watching him. Not with childish curiosity, but with the cautious focus of a small animal that had learned how danger moved. Every time Evan adjusted his posture, Leo's eyes tracked it. Every time Evan's breathing changed, even slightly, Leo's gaze snapped up as if reading a signal. Evan kept his face calm, forced his shoulders loose, controlled his inhalations the way he controlled his entire existence at work. It was exhausting, but it was familiar. He had survived by becoming steady. Leo stood after a long stretch of silence. He held his toy in one hand like a shield and took a few careful steps forward. He didn't cross the whole room. He stopped halfway, as if the air itself had a line he needed to test before committing. His small fingers tightened around the toy's ear, then relaxed. His shoulders lowered by a fraction, the tiniest release. Evan stayed still. He did not reach out. He did not speak. He let the child's instincts set the distance. Damien watched the movement with something that looked like irritation at first, a subtle tightening in his jaw as if he disliked variables. Then, that irritation shifted into something closer to alarm, sharp and quick, because whatever Leo was doing, it wasn't random. It was selection. Evan felt understanding twist in his gut like cold wire. Leo might have been imprinting, not in the exaggerated myths people gossiped about, but in the quiet, biological way a child's nervous system latched onto safe patterns during trauma. A child did not need romance or words to imprint. A child needed a heartbeat that didn't spike, a voice that didn't cut, a presence that didn't demand. Safety was chemistry and rhythm before it was logic. And Evan, the Omega secretary who had been planning to disappear, was being pulled into that role. Damien moved subtly, not rushing, not dramatic. He stepped between Evan and Leo for a moment, cutting the line of sight as if repositioning a piece on a board. He adjusted Leo's folded blanket on the bench with a controlled, almost casual motion that carried a warning without words. Remember who controls the space. Evan saw the tension in Damien's hands when he did it, not anger, fear. A fear Evan had never seen on Damien Cross, not even in crisis meetings and market collapses. This was not fear of riot noise or broken glass. It was fear of attachment, because if Leo attached to Evan, Evan became more than staff. He became leverage. Above them, the riot surged in silent motion. On the wall screen, a camera feed switched to a service hallway. A group entered the frame with faces masked and bodies moving in coordination that didn't belong to random civilians. They carried tools, not signs, not bottles. Tools that suggested they weren't here to protest. They moved like people looking for something specific. Damien's body went still so abruptly it felt like the temperature dropped. The machine froze into a predator, every muscle aligning toward threat. His gaze pinned the screen, reading movement the way he read markets. Patterns, intent, timing. The panic room rules shifted in that instant. The unspoken code changed its center. It was no longer about waiting calmly behind steel. It was about surviving what was coming down. The first sound that reached them was not shouting or sirens. It was a vibration, low and rhythmic, traveling through the floor like a pulse the building could not hide. It arrived in repeating impacts, spaced with intention, too heavy and synchronized to be random chaos. Evan felt it in his bones before his mind gave it meaning. The riot was supposed to be above, loud and messy, trapped behind glass and distance. The lower levels were supposed to be sealed. Yet the floor carried footsteps that sounded like a team moving in formation. The wall screen flickered as if the building itself hesitated. Feeds cut out, returned, then jumped to new angles. A corridor view stabilized for a few seconds and showed movement too close to the door, labeled with a single letter. Too close to see Damien cross the room with the sharp stillness of a predator narrowing on prey. His eyes tightened, taking in details that Evan's panic wanted to blur. The figures in the corridor did not move like guards and did not move like rioters. Their uniforms were wrong in small ways that mattered. Seams, straps, patches placed with almost correct care. Their gait was controlled, heavy with equipment, shoulders squared like men trained to keep pace under stress. They carried tools that did not belong to protest violence. Cutting equipment, pry bars. A compact device held in both hands that looked like it belonged in a security lab. Its casing was matte and clean, and a thin light pulsed along its edge like a restrained heartbeat. Someone had brought the riot down here on purpose. Leo's breath hitched, soft but unmistakable, the first visible crack in his practiced stillness. It was a child's body betraying what his face refused to show. His fingers tightened around his toy until the fabric puckered, and his eyes flicked from the screen to Damien and back, tracking the room the way a small animal tracked exit routes. Evan's throat tightened with an instinct he did not know how to express safely. He wanted to reassure Leo, to say something simple and human. You are safe. It will be okay. But he also knew the danger of closeness in the world he lived in. Touch could be misread. Kindness could be interpreted as manipulation, and Damien Cross measured everything as risk. Damien did not speak. He moved to the wall panel, entered a command, and a second lock engaged with a heavier click than the first sequence. The sound was thick and final, steel answering steel. Then Damien went to the medical cabinet. He punched in a code with 2 quick movements, and the cabinet released. Inside, everything was sealed, sorted, clinical. Damien withdrew a compact emergency kit wrapped in dark packaging. It was not a weapon in the obvious sense, no firearm, no blade. It was the kind of kit designed for controlled emergencies. A flare, trauma bandages, a small injector shaped like a pen. Evan recognized the injector too late, his stomach dropping as understanding snapped into place. It was not for Leo. It was an alpha-grade suppressant booster. Damien's eyes flicked to Evan's neck and then away, fast and impersonal. There was no desire in it, not even judgment, only calculation. If stress pushed Evan's scent up, the panic room became a hazard, and the child became exposed to another variable Damien could not control. Evan felt cold spread under his ribs. He was an Omega sealed in a bunker with a powerful Alpha, whose control was being tested by external threat. The room that was built to protect was now also a pressure chamber. Corporate safety shaped into a nightmare. On the corridor feed, one of the men approached the door area, then stepped out of frame. The screen went black for a split second, then returned. When it came back, a thin, pulsing blue light appeared near the door seam, close enough that Evan's skin prickled. They were scanning, not guessing, not searching, confirming. Damien's voice remained level when he spoke, as if the words were being read from a protocol sheet. He instructed Evan to sit with Leo and keep him calm. It sounded like an order for stability, but Evan understood the deeper meaning. Damien was not trusting him with his son in a warm, parental way. He was using him as a stabilizer because Leo's nervous system had already started leaning toward Evan's presence. Evan moved to the bench slowly, keeping his hands visible, his motions deliberate. He sat beside Leo with distance, leaving space so the child could choose. His body felt too big in the small room. Every breath felt loud. Leo's small shoulder brushed Evan's sleeve as if by accident, then stayed there for a fraction of a second longer than accident allowed. Evan felt the tremor in the child's body, restrained but real. Fear contained so tightly it became a physical vibration. The knock came next, not on the main panic room door, not on the steel itself, because steel was meant to be challenged. The knock came on the adjacent wall panel, soft and deliberate, placed where it would be felt more than heard. A tap that suggested they knew exactly which seam to test, exactly which section might hide wiring or access. Then another knock, slightly different spacing. Then the sound of metal grinding lightly against metal, like a tool testing a surface without committing yet. A quiet scrape, careful and patient, the kind of sound that said the people outside had time and experience. Leo's fingers clenched so hard that the toy's stitched seams strained under the pressure. His breath became shallow. His eyes stayed open, unblinking, a child refusing to cry because crying had never helped. Evan's instincts screamed to run. Every part of his body wanted distance, air, escape. There was nowhere to go. The room had been designed to be the last place you could hide, which meant it was also the last place you could be trapped. Damien lowered the light slightly. It was a protocol move, meant to reduce visibility through any internal seam if someone used optical equipment. The room darkened just enough to make the screen glow harsher. Damien's silhouette became sharper, his posture changing from corporate authority into something older. He positioned himself between the door and the bench, between the threat and the 2 vulnerable bodies behind him. He did it with silent precision, shoulders squared, weight balanced, as if he had trained for this in a life Evan had never been allowed to see. In that moment, Evan understood the truth behind Damien's coldness. It was not arrogance. It was not simply power. It was a survival system built to function under attack, a way of living that assumed someone would eventually come through the walls. And now that system was being forced into direct confrontation. The riot above was noise, cover, a distraction built out of chaos. The real attack had been planned for this room, and Evan, who had thought he was leaving the company with a quiet email and a clean goodbye, realized he had already crossed into Damien Cross's most protected secret. A secret guarded by steel, by protocols, and by the kind of enemies who did not bother to shout. The knocks continued, patient and deliberate, and in the silence between them, the panic room rules rewrote themselves again, no longer about waiting, only about surviving. The door did not breach immediately. The people outside were patient, and patience was its own kind of violence. They tested the perimeter in small, methodical ways, tapping, scraping, pausing to listen. They were mapping weak points, waiting for a mistake, counting on fear to make someone careless. Time stretched until every second felt like a thin wire pulled tight. Inside the panic room, the air stayed stable because the system was designed to deny reality. Cool, dry, sterile. The hum of ventilation never changed its pitch. It should have been comforting. Instead, it felt like the room was practicing calm while the world tried to tear its skin open. Damien checked the internal comms again. The handset connected to nothing. The wall console showed no clean line. The jammer in the corridor was working, cutting the building's lower levels off from the systems that were supposed to make extraction possible. Damien's face did not change, but the muscles in his jaw tightened in a way Evan had begun to recognize as the closest thing to visible pressure. Evan's body reacted despite his discipline. Suppressants had limits, and panic was an acid that ate through routine. He felt his own scent trying to rise, warm and sharp beneath his skin, a faint shimmer of omeganess he despised. It started as heat behind his collarbone, then spread under his ribs, making him painfully aware of his pulse. He swallowed hard, controlled his breath, forced his shoulders down. The suppressants kept him from spilling fully into the air, but they could not erase the biological truth that fear woke up. Leo seemed to sense it anyway. The child shifted closer by inches, leaning into Evan's steadiness as if the nervous system recognized a pattern it could cling to. Leo's breathing slowed when Evan's arm remained still. The tremor in the child's body softened slightly, not because danger had gone away, but because proximity to calm created an illusion of safety the brain could use. Damien noticed the change. His eyes flicked to Evan with an expression Evan could not name. It was not softness. It was not gratitude. It was the cold realization that biology was rewriting the plan, that the room's most unpredictable variable had just become essential. The secret surfaced in fragments, the way real secrets always did. Not as confession, not as dramatic revelation, but as evidence forcing itself through a crack. Damien's phone caught signal for half a second, just long enough to flash a single word before the jammer swallowed it again. Evan saw it in the reflected glow off the monitor. Vault. The screen went dark again. Damien's hand tightened around the phone. He stared at the corridor feed, and for the first time, Evan saw him not as a CEO managing crisis, but as a man tracking an enemy. The men outside moved with a pattern that did not match opportunistic riot violence. They rotated positions. One watched the corridor angles. One handled the device. Another stood slightly back, scanning their surroundings, communicating with subtle shifts of posture. They weren't here to loot. They weren't here to make a statement. They were here for something contained, for someone. Evan's mind reached backward through the quiet anomalies of his job, the rumors he had heard and trained himself to ignore. Whispers about vault assets and silent acquisitions, about budgets that never matched any department's paperwork. He had processed invoices that did not belong to any legitimate vendor list. He had filed travel reimbursements with destinations that looked like mistakes until you realized they were near private airstrips. He had scheduled meetings that never appeared on official calendars and were always followed by Damien, emerging paler from somewhere the building insisted didn't exist. Evan had told himself it wasn't his business. That was how you survived around powerful alphas. You did not connect dots that could become a noose. Now the dots were at his door. Damien stepped to a section of wall Evan had assumed was seamless and pressed his palm against it. A hidden compartment released with a quiet click, not a mechanical failure sound, but a designed obedience. Damien opened it and pulled out a small safe box, matte black and heavy enough to feel serious even from across the room. He set it on the table without ceremony. He keyed in a code. The lid opened. Inside were paper documents, old-fashioned and physical, as if someone had understood that digital records could be hacked, erased, rewritten. Paper had weight. Paper could be carried. Paper could be burned if necessary. Evan saw a copy of a birth certificate, edges crisp, ink official. He saw a sealed custody order with multiple signatures and a stamp that looked like it belonged to a court that did not handle ordinary cases. And beneath those, a folder marked with a security classification stamp, the kind that implied government contact without ever admitting it. Evan did not need to read every line to understand the shape of the secret. Leo was not just the CEO's child. Leo was an heir tied to something powerful enough to send trained men into a panic room during a city riot. Damien's control was not about image, not really. It was about survival. It was about keeping this child alive in a world where wealth attracted predators and power attracted knives. The second truth hit Evan harder because it explained the silence that had always surrounded Leo's existence. Leo's other parent was not unknown. The absence was not tragedy. It was deliberate removal. Evan saw it in the way the custody order was phrased, in the language that hinted at protection and risk without ever naming what the risk was. Someone had been erased from public record under legal cover, disappeared for safety, or disappeared as punishment. The line between those things felt thin. Evan's thoughts snapped through every rumor about Damien Cross, the ruthless alpha who destroyed competitors, the man who never dated publicly, the executive whispered to have buried scandals and bought outcomes. Evan had treated those stories as corporate mythology, exaggerated to make fear entertaining. What if it wasn't mythology? What if Cross and Vale Capital was the public skin and the real structure lived beneath it? Above them, the riot continued as silent footage. In the distance on one feed, fire glowed like a wound across the city. Emergency alerts scrolled across the screen in clean corporate font. Curfew, violence, stay indoors. The warnings felt almost comical in the face of what was happening below ground. In the corridor outside, the blue light intensified at the door seam. The lock mechanism began to whine faintly, a subtle mechanical complaint that made Evan's stomach drop. The intruders weren't rushing. They were applying pressure with tools made for patience. They were trying to make the steel yield without making noise. Damien took a slow breath, and the room's center of gravity shifted. He moved the safe box across the table, placing it within Evan's reach. It was not a casual gesture. It was not trust. It was contingency. A silent instruction. If he went down, Evan became responsible for what the documents represented. Evan's hands trembled as they hovered near paper he had no right to touch. His fingertips didn't land. He couldn't bring himself to claim that kind of knowledge, yet the placement alone already made him part of it. Leo leaned into him again, small and warm and terrifyingly trusting. The child's body chose Evan's steadiness like a life raft. Evan understood the new reality with cold clarity. This was not a workplace emergency anymore. This was a custody war hidden inside a riot, and Evan had stepped into it by accident, becoming the only person in the room whose presence could keep the child calm enough to survive what was coming through the steel. The first mechanical failure did not come from the door. It came from the ceiling. A soft alarm chirped once, so quiet it almost sounded like a notification from a muted phone. Evan barely registered it, but Damien did. His head lifted immediately, eyes narrowing at the ventilation panel as if he had heard a flaw in a familiar song. The panic room had independent air by design. That was the point. A sealed shelter was only a shelter if it could breathe without relying on the building above. Independent systems could still be sabotaged. Damien crossed the room and opened the vent panel with a tool pulled from the emergency kit. The screws released cleanly, too cleanly, like the panel was meant to be accessed fast. Inside, the filter unit pulsed with an irregular rhythm. A status light that should have held steady blinked in short, uneven bursts, then paused, then blinked again. The airflow changed in small, almost invisible ways, but Evan felt it as a shift against his skin. The room smelled slightly different, less sterile, more metallic. Evan's lungs tightened, not from obvious poison, not from smoke, but from something wrong that his body could not name. In a sealed room, wrong was enough. Wrong meant danger that had time to become lethal. Leo reacted first in the way children always did, before language and logic could build a mask. His breathing hitched and became shallow. He pressed a hand to his chest, then looked at Evan with wide eyes that did not know how to ask for help yet. His face stayed controlled, trained, but his body betrayed him. Evan's stomach turned cold. Damien's voice stayed calm as he assessed the panel, but the calm was sharpened now, like a blade kept steady with effort. He said the interference outside was not only blocking signal, it was affecting internal sensors. Either the jammer's range was broader than expected, or someone had access to a secondary control path for the panic room systems. The oxygen problem was not an accident, it was leverage. If the intruders could not breach the door cleanly, they could force the people inside to open it. They could starve the room of comfort first, then of air, then of time. They could turn the safest place into a trap that begged for escape. Evan felt anger rise so fast it surprised him. It was not rational or polite. It came from somewhere deep and old, from a place in his nervous system that remembered other locked doors, other rooms where an Omega's panic had been treated like entertainment or weakness. The part of him that had once begged an alpha not to close something behind him. The part that had learned how captivity rewired the brain, how it made every breath feel like it belonged to someone else. His hands clenched against his thigh until his knuckles ached. He looked at Damien and understood something new under the surface of the CEO's cold control. Damien was not just composed, Damien was terrified of making the wrong move because every wrong move would cost Leo. Damien adjusted the airflow manually, fingers moving through the panel with practiced certainty. He rerouted a secondary valve, bypassed the blinking filter unit, and dampened the alarm. The hum of ventilation changed pitch, lower and steadier. The metallic edge in the air softened slightly. It was not fixed, only stabilized, like a bleeding wound compressed with a hand. The edges of panic remained. Leo shifted closer to Evan without fully meaning to. It was unconscious, instinctive, as if his body sought the calmest heartbeat in the room and treated it like oxygen. Evan forced his own breathing into a slower rhythm, deep enough to steady his chest, careful enough to keep his scent flat. He focused on being an anchor, because the child needed one more than Evan needed to express his fear. Outside, the corridor feed showed the intruders stepping back, then returning with different equipment. They worked in cycles, never rushing, never showing frustration. They had time, they had confidence, they had a plan that did not depend on brute force. Damien checked the screen again and again. The blue light near the door seam returned intermittently, pulsing, fading, then returning stronger. The lock mechanism whined in a faint, persistent way, not like it was failing, but like it was being tested by pressure applied with care. Minutes stretched into what felt like an hour. Evan's sense of time blurred, dragged by tension and the steady effort of breathing calmly in air that kept threatening to become wrong again. Then Damien's phone buzzed, one pulse, a single vibration that felt louder than it should have in the sealed room. The message punched through the interference like a knife slipping between ribs. Evan saw it in the faint glow reflected off Damien's hand before it vanished. Board authorized extraction. Board authorized extraction. The words turned Evan's blood colder than the metallic air ever could. The riot above had not only created cover, someone inside the company had sanctioned this, someone with access, someone with authority, someone who could turn a panic room into a coffin by remote control and call it procedure. Damien's face went blank in a way Evan had never seen. Not calm, not composed, emptied, like he had to strip himself of every emotion because there was no room left for betrayal. Betrayal was a luxury that took time to process, and time was the only resource they were losing. Evan understood what it meant with sick clarity. The enemy was not only outside, it was inside the building, inside the company, inside the structure Evan had served, filed for, cleaned up after, tried to resign from as if resignation was a real exit. His resignation letter suddenly felt naive. You did not resign from a system like this, you escaped it, and escape required a route no board could authorize. Damien moved to a floor panel near the bench and pried it open with a tool. The panel released with a soft resistance, then lifted. Underneath was a concealed hatch, narrow and dark, the outline of a secondary exit route designed for worst-case scenarios that no public blueprint would ever admit existed. A breath of colder air rose from below, carrying the smell of concrete and dust, the scent of tunnels and contingency. Evan's pulse spiked. The riot had trapped them. The sabotage had cornered them. The board had sanctioned extraction, which meant sanctioned removal. Now the panic room had one remaining advantage. It was built with a way out that wasn't on any map. Damien looked at Evan, and something passed between them that felt like the first real trust Evan had ever been offered. Not kindness, not warmth. Necessity sharpened into choice. The message was clear without words. If they moved, Evan would have to carry more than his own fear. He would have to carry Leo. The hatch opened with a reluctant scrape, as if the floor itself resisted being turned into an exit. Cold air breathed up from below, heavier than the panic room's filtered calm. It carried the smell of old concrete, dust that had settled for years, and a faint metallic tang that reminded Evan of static electricity after a storm. The darkness under the hatch was not absolute. Dim emergency lights ran along one wall in uneven intervals, small amber glows powered by a separate circuit that did not depend on the building above. It looked less like a modern corporate facility and more like a scar that had been covered and forgotten. Damien went first without hesitation. He dropped through the opening and landed softly, knees bending with controlled impact. He moved like someone who had memorized this route long ago, not in theory, but in muscle memory. The kind of memory you carried when you had practiced escape in your head during sleepless nights. Evan followed with Leo in his arms. The child was light, but the responsibility was not. Leo's small hands fisted into Evan's shirt with desperate strength, fabric twisting under his grip, as if Evan's body were the only stable surface left in a world that kept shifting. Leo did not cry. He did not speak. He simply held on and breathed shallowly against Evan's collarbone. Evan felt his omega instincts flare under the pressure. The closeness of the child, the sealed space, the fear threading through his blood like electricity, all of it made scent harder to suppress. He felt it as warmth under his skin, a pulse of vulnerability that wanted to escape through pores and breath. He forced it down with discipline and nausea because he understood something primal. Tunnels carried smell the way they carried sound. The wrong scent in a confined corridor could become a beacon. Behind them, the panic room's door alarm finally screamed. The sound was muffled by steel and distance, but it was unmistakable. A harsh, mechanical wail that meant someone had breached enough to trigger internal alerts. The intruders would find the hatch soon, and once they did, the tunnel would become a choke point, a narrow artery where escape could turn into capture in seconds. Damien did not look back. He moved forward, fast but controlled, guiding them through turns that felt impossible for the building's layout. Evan had worked in that tower for years. He thought he understood its bones. Down here, the architecture told a different story. This was not standard construction. It felt like private paranoia shaped into concrete, a hidden skeleton beneath polished floors. The tunnel sloped slightly downward, then leveled, then turned again. Pipes ran along the ceiling in neat lines, some labeled with codes Evan could not interpret. The air grew colder in pockets, warmer in others, as if different zones fed different systems. Somewhere above, faint vibrations trembled through the ceiling, footsteps and movement filtered through layers of reinforced infrastructure. The riot was still happening, but down here it became a distant pressure rather than noise. At an intersection, Damien stopped and listened. Silence in a tunnel was never pure. It carried subtle signals, a faint metallic shift far away, the hum of machinery, the distant echo of something heavy being moved. Evan held his breath without meaning to. Leo's grip tightened as if he sensed the pause. Damien chose a direction without hesitation. They moved again. Evan's arms began to ache, not from Leo's weight alone, but from the strain of holding a living, trembling secret against his chest while his body tried to prepare for impact. Leo's breathing stayed slow, but every few seconds a restrained hiccup shuddered through him, fear trying to become sound and being swallowed back. Evan kept walking because stopping felt like dying. The tunnel widened into a maintenance chamber that smelled even older, damp concrete mixed with stale air. A locked door waited on the far side, keypad, scanner, no markings, the kind of door that belonged to people who did not want to be found. Damien's hand hovered near the keypad for a moment. Evan saw his fingers tremble slightly. Not fear, Evan realized. Exhaustion, the tremor of a man who had been holding control so long, his body was beginning to show the cost. Damien entered the code. The scanner flashed once. The lock released with a low, heavy click that sounded like permission. The door opened onto a stairwell rising toward an underground garage. The smell changed immediately. Fuel, rubber, cold air leaking from an exterior ramp. It felt closer to the surface, closer to the real world, but not in a comforting way. It felt like a new arena where the rules were less sterile and more violent. A vehicle waited in the garage, black, armored, unmarked. Not a company fleet car, not anything with a logo or an ID number. The kind of vehicle you used when you wanted to disappear into traffic without leaving a paper trail. Damien opened the rear door and gestured for Evan to get in first. Evan climbed inside with Leo, seating the child carefully on the leather seat. Leo refused to let go of Evan's sleeve even when Evan tried to adjust him, his small fingers locked like a promise that he did not know how to articulate. Evan felt his chest tighten around something sharp and unfamiliar. Damien's eyes flicked to that grip. A subtle reaction crossed his face, too fast to name. But it was there. Not anger, not relief. Something complicated and dangerous. The engine hummed to life. The driver said nothing. A silent, professional presence, hands steady on the wheel. The windows were tinted so dark the garage lights became smears, and the Riot above might as well have been another planet. As the vehicle rolled forward, the route did not go toward safe streets or police escorts. It aimed toward the industrial edge of the city, where traffic cameras were fewer and sirens meant different things. The ramp climbed gradually, and Evan felt the subtle shift as they approached open air. He looked back through the rear window, trying to see through the darkness. For a moment, the garage behind them was visible in a narrow slice of reflected light. A shadow moved at the far end, a figure entering the space too late, head turning as if searching. Damien's hand tightened on the armrest. They had escaped the panic room. They had not escaped the hunt. Evan's mind kept returning to the words he had seen. Board-authorized extraction. It meant this was sanctioned, planned, normalized under the language of corporate governance. It meant someone wanted Leo, not just Damien, or wanted Damien through Leo. It meant the polished company above hid a war beneath it, and Evan had been filing paperwork for a battlefield without knowing it. Leo leaned against Evan, eyes finally closing for the first time since the lockdown. The child fell asleep, with Evan's scent in his lungs, trusting him like a living sedative. His body relaxed in a way that felt terrifyingly intimate, as if Evan's presence had become a biological command for safety. Evan felt something dangerous wake up in himself. Not attraction, not romance, protectiveness, the kind that made people do stupid, brave things. He had planned to quit. Now he was holding the CEO's air while the city rioted and the company itself had sanctioned removal. The weight of Leo's head against his chest felt heavier than any contract Evan had ever signed, and the worst part crystallized with sudden clarity. If Leo trusted Evan more than Damien did, then Evan was no longer collateral. He was the key. They did not go to Damien's main residence. That place would be the first to be watched, the first to be ringed by cameras that did not belong to him, the first address any board-authorized operation would treat like a predictable endpoint. The armored vehicle stayed away from the clean, wealthy districts and drifted instead toward a neglected edge of the city where money learned to hide by pretending to be nothing. The streets here looked tired. Storefronts were half-lit, metal shutters pulled down as if the neighborhood expected trouble even on normal nights. The riot sirens did not follow them directly, but the air still carried the distant pulse of unrest, like a fever the city could not sweat out. The building Damien chose was narrow and plain, its brickwork stained by years of rain. The entrance door stuck slightly as it opened, not from lack of maintenance, but from the kind of old frame that shifted with seasons. The elevator was slow, groaning upward with stubborn reluctance. The hallway on the upper floor smelled of dust and old paint. No cameras in the ceiling corners, no security desk, no concierge pretending not to notice people. It was the kind of place no one glamorous would ever admit to needing. A safe house. Damien unlocked a door that looked ordinary, the kind of door you could walk past and forget. Inside, the apartment was too clean, too prepared, too intentional for the building around it. It did not feel lived in. It felt staged for survival. Bottled water was stacked in a cabinet with the same neatness Evan had seen in the panic room. A medical bag sat on the counter, zipped closed, positioned as if it had a designated spot. Extra children's clothing was folded in a drawer, sizes arranged in a quiet progression. An envelope of emergency cash rested in a kitchen cupboard, sealed and dated in ink that Evan did not have time to read. There were no family photos, no decorative clutter, no personal warmth, just readiness. Damien had planned for this. Evan's chest tightened with a realization that did not feel like surprise anymore, only confirmation. Damien lived as if the riot was never exceptional, as if betrayal was always expected, as if panic rooms and tunnels and unmarked vehicles were not contingency, but routine. Leo woke briefly when Evan set him down on the couch. His eyes blinked open with confusion, then narrowed as his gaze tried to understand the new room. For a second, he looked almost like a normal child pulled from sleep, small and disoriented. Then his body made a choice that did not require thought. He reached for Evan again, clinging to Evan's sleeve with the same instinctive certainty he had shown in the tunnel. He did not look at Damien. That absence of looking was louder than any cry. Leo's nervous system had labeled Evan as safety. Evan was the one who held him through the concrete dark passage. Evan was the one whose breathing stayed steady. Evan was the one whose scent remained soft and stable instead of sharp command. Damien watched it without speaking. He stood still for a moment, hands at his sides, face controlled. But Evan could see the cost in his eyes. It was not jealousy in any ordinary sense. It was something colder and more dangerous, the awareness that his son's trust was shifting away from him, and that shift could become a weapon in someone else's hands. The apartment's quiet made truth surface. Leo's mother had not simply left. The absence was too clean, too engineered. The extra clothing, the safe house, the sealed cash, the custody documents Evan had glimpsed, all of it suggested removal, not loss. A disappearance justified by the language of security, which in Damien's world could mean protection, punishment, or both, depending on who was holding the knife. Evan's mind began connecting dots he had refused to connect while filing invoices and arranging schedules. The meetings marked C. The classified expenses routed through departments that did not officially exist. The silent payouts that were coded as compliance fees. Audits that never went to human resources, never left paper trails, never asked questions in ways normal companies asked questions. Damien Cross was not only a CEO, he was a man who had built a fortress out of his company, and the board was not simply a group of greedy investors. They were part of the fortress, or they were the enemy inside it. Damien opened a laptop and connected through a protected line that did not rely on standard networks. The screen filled with news feeds and alerts, the riot escalating in real time. Police lines breaking, emergency declarations, curfew orders, words like containment and public safety scrolling beneath images of fire and crowds. The city was becoming an excuse, a blanket of chaos useful for actions that would be impossible under normal scrutiny. Damien watched for a minute, then moved to a folder of internal documents. His face hardened as he read, the expression shifting from corporate discipline into something older and darker than business aggression. Evan saw his own file among the documents, not performance reviews, not standard employment paperwork, a background report, his childhood address, his Omega registration, medical history, records that should not have been in a corporate folder unless the company's definition of hiring included surveillance. Evan's throat tightened. A flash of fury rose hot enough to make his hands shake. For a moment he wanted to demand an explanation, to spit the anger out like poison. Then he remembered where he was, who he was with, and what was at stake. He swallowed hard and forced his voice into a low, controlled shape, the only kind Damien respected. Damien did not apologize. He did not soften what it meant. He explained it the way he explained everything. Dry, precise, stripped of any language that might sound like guilt. Evan had been screened because Leo needed stability, because Leo had a rare neurological sensitivity that reacted violently to high-stress alpha dominance, because Leo's nervous system calmed around omega scent, not any omega, but a specific profile, steady, low-reactive, trauma-aware, unlikely to spike into panic or aggression under pressure. Evan felt sick as the words landed. He had not been hired because he was good at his job. He had been hired because he was useful to Damien's son. The violation cut deeper than the surveillance itself. It meant that every late night in the office, every accidental proximity to Damien's life, every controlled interaction had been shaped in advance. Evan had believed his competence earned him proximity. Instead, his biology and his trauma history had made him a strategic asset, a stabilizer, a tool. And now the board had decided to take Leo anyway. Evan looked at Leo, already drifting back to sleep on the couch, small face softening for the first time in hours, his toy pressed under his chin like a comfort object that had survived too much. The child's hand still held a piece of Evan's sleeve as if letting go would bring the chaos back. Evan's resignation letter felt like paper dust now. A pathetic attempt to exit a system that had been using him long before he understood it. He was not resigning from an employer. He was caught inside a custody battle engineered by power, sealed under corporate language and emergency protocols. And in the quiet of an apartment with no records, Evan faced the first real decision of his life in that company. He could let himself be used, a stabilizer until the board's extraction succeeded, or he could choose his own role in this story, even if choosing meant stepping directly into the line of fire. Morning arrived without sunrise. The safehouse windows were covered, and the city outside was still unstable, still bleeding noise into the distance. The only light inside the apartment was artificial, sharp, and controlled, the kind that made everything look clean even when nothing was safe. It felt like the life Damien Cross lived, illumination without warmth, clarity without comfort. Leo woke hungry and disoriented. His eyes opened slowly, scanning the room as if checking whether the night had changed the rules again. Evan moved on instinct, not because he was trained for this, but because his body refused to let a child flounder in fear while adults stood frozen. He found what the safe house had prepared: pre-measured packets, bottled water, sterile wipes, a small note in a clipped hand that listed basic instructions without sentiment. Evan fed Leo from what was available. The child ate slowly, cautious, as if even hunger needed to be managed carefully. When he finished, he leaned into Evan with the same unthinking certainty he had shown in the tunnel. He pressed his forehead against Evan's shoulder and exhaled, and the simple trust in that breath made Evan's chest tighten. Damien watched from across the kitchen, his face carved into control. He stood with his phone in one hand, the other resting near the counter as if anchoring himself to something solid. The stillness was deliberate, almost surgical. Yet Evan began to notice micro-failures, small glitches in the machine. Damien's hand shook once when he poured water, a quick tremor that vanished immediately as if erased. His eyes flicked too often toward Leo, as if checking a vital sign without permission. He flinched at certain news alerts, not at the riot footage itself, but at corporate language that scrolled beneath it. Words like relocation, compliance, asset protection, temporary custody measures, sanitized phrases designed to make violence sound like paperwork. Evan recognized that language. He had typed it, filed it, sent it. He had watched executives use clean words to hide dirty actions. The board's move was accelerating. Internal channels Damien accessed through encrypted lines showed emergency directives and carefully phrased updates. It was all presented as risk management and public safety, but the structure beneath it was clear. Key assets would be moved, secured, extracted, controlled. Leo was not being treated as a child. He was being treated as a piece on a board. Damien opened a hidden drive and brought up recorded feeds from the underground corridor. Footage Evan had not seen in the panic room, angles pulled from secured cameras that did not route through the building's standard system. The images were grainy but clear enough. A moment where one intruder's mask slipped, a face exposed for a fraction of a second. Evan's stomach dropped because the face was familiar in a way corporate workers recognized. Not personal familiarity, but organizational. A security contractor whose name Evan had seen on invoices stamped through special authorization. A man linked to one board member's private protective detail, a team that did not belong to the city's chaos but to the company's internal power structure. Damien was not imagining betrayal. He had proof. The problem was proof did not stop men with cutting tools. Evidence did not hold a door shut. A file could be deleted. A witness could be discredited. A child could be taken while everyone argued about legality. They needed leverage bigger than a recording. Damien made calls using secure lines that did not sound like ordinary executive networking. People answered quickly, not with friendliness, not with flattery, with readiness, the tone of a command structure. Evan listened to the clipped exchanges and understood with a slow chill that Damien's world had always been larger than finance. This company was a fortress, and fortresses had enemies. Evan's fear shifted into clarity. Damien's coldness had always been armor, designed to deflect threats, intimidate rivals, absorb betrayal without cracking. But armor could not hold a child through a panic attack. Armor could not teach safety. Armor could only block the blow. Leo needed something else. Evan was exhausted, angry, and suddenly done with being treated as a stabilizing object in someone else's strategy. The pushback came from a place he had spent years burying. Not rebellion for drama, but reality refusing to be ignored. He spoke without shouting, because shouting would only turn the room into another battlefield. His words were controlled, but their meaning was sharp. He pointed to what was happening right in front of them. Leo's nervous system was choosing Evan because Evan felt safe. Not powerful, not rich, safe. Leo's attachment was forming because trauma had forced proximity, and now the child's body clung to the calmest rhythm it could find. The more Damien tried to control every variable, the more Leo sensed the tension, and the more the child's body prepared for pressure. Damien's fear was teaching his son to fear him too. The sentence landed like a crack in glass. Damien's eyes flashed, and for a moment Evan expected rage. Instead, what surfaced was pain, sharp and immediate, not the pain of ego, the pain of recognition. A crack in the machine that revealed the man underneath. The shift happened quietly. Damien crossed the room and sat down on the floor near the couch where Leo curled against Evan. He did not touch Leo at first. He did not reach. He simply existed in the same space, lowering himself physically as if trying to lower the threat his presence represented. Leo's eyes widened. His small body stiffened, preparing for dominance that might press down. The child did not recoil, but he froze, the way he had frozen in the panic room. Stillness as defense. Damien slowed his breathing. He copied Evan's calm rhythm like a man learning a language he had never been taught. Inhale, steady. Exhale, controlled. No sudden movements, no sharp scent shifts, no command in posture, just presence, measured and careful. Minutes passed. Leo's shoulders lowered by a fraction. He did not move toward Damien, but he did not flee either. He remained, watching, waiting, testing the air with instincts that had grown too mature too soon. Evan felt a strange ache bloom in his chest. This was not romance. This was not tenderness wrapped in pretty words. It was raw and awkward and real. A father trying to become emotionally safe for his own child under the shadow of a hunt. Damien spoke again, and this time the words carried something different. Not corporate phrasing, not protocol. Truth delivered in controlled pieces, because that was the only way he knew how. He told Evan about Leo's mother, not the details that would turn it into a dramatic story, not names and dates. Enough. She had been targeted. She had been used as leverage. Removing her had been framed as protection, but it had also been an erasure signed into existence by legal documents and quiet power. Damien had signed papers that made her disappear from records to keep Leo alive. He had lived with that guilt like a second spine, and the board had used it to control him ever since. Evan understood then why Damien never smiled. Because smiling made you look soft. Softness invited pressure. Softness got people taken. Softness had cost him everything. Now softness was the only thing that might save Leo. They needed to leave the city. They needed to break the board's grip. They needed a plan that included more than security and money. It had to include attachment, trust, the kind of safety that could not be authorized or extracted by a committee. Damien's gaze shifted to Evan, and for the first time, it held something that changed the air. Not staff evaluation, not asset assessment, recognition. Damien looked at Evan as a person whose presence his child genuinely needed, not as a tool to be positioned, and that recognition altered the balance of power in the room, because it meant Evan was no longer just leverage the board could steal. He was becoming part of the reason Leo might survive. Escaping was never just physical. A locked door could be bypassed, a tunnel could be found, a vehicle could outrun a crowd. The harder part was severing from the system that had built Damian Cross's life. The company was not only a workplace. It was a fortress, a mask, a supply line, and a weapon. Leaving it meant detonating everything that made the board feel untouchable, and everything that made Damian predictable. Damian initiated a controlled collapse. He did it the way he did everything, without drama, without mercy, with precision that turned panic into steps. He opened a secured console on the laptop, hands steady, eyes flat, and triggered safeguards that Evan had never known existed. Company accounts were locked behind emergency protocols. Access privileges tied to board members were frozen. A chain of automated actions launched in the background, quiet as a breath. Contingency holds, asset locks, multi-signature approvals that now required keys the board did not possess. Then came the corporate detonation. Damian packaged evidence into encrypted bundles and pushed them into channels that would release once connectivity stabilized, not just to one authority, but to multiple points of friction: regulators, independent watchdog groups, rival compliance firms, and media contacts that specialized in corporate crime. He did not send a single accusation. He sent receipts, logs, footage, names tied to invoices and contractors, a map of betrayal built out of paperwork so clean it could not be dismissed as rumor. It was designed to make extraction too expensive to continue quietly. The board responded exactly as a wounded structure responded. Threats arrived first, stamped with legal language that pretended force was professionalism. Emergency injunctions were filed. Notices appeared demanding the immediate return of protected assets under safety clauses. A cascade of procedural violence, sanitized and efficient. The riot above gave them cover to move aggressively, but it also created noise, a chaos Damian used as camouflage while he broke their spine. The safe house became a staging point. Damian worked the way a man worked when he had already accepted that the bridge behind him would burn. He arranged a private evacuation route that avoided main streets and official checkpoints, favoring service corridors and industrial edges where cameras were fewer and the city's attention was elsewhere. He mapped low-traffic roads, timed patrol patterns, and layered contingencies inside contingencies. He planned like a man who had done this before. Evan realized the hardest part was not leaving the city. It was leaving the identity he had built to survive in it. Secretary, Omega, replaceable, quiet. His whole life in that building had been a careful act of shrinking. Never too loud, never too visible, never too emotional. A controlled presence that could pass as harmless. He had believed the resignation letter would be his clean exit, his way to vanish before the company swallowed him fully. Now, vanishing was no longer an option. Once he walked out with Damian and Leo, he would become visible to people who weaponized visibility. Visible to the board, visible to media hungry for scandal, visible to every alpha who would rewrite the story into something ugly and convenient. Evan could already hear the narrative being assembled somewhere behind tinted glass. Omega manipulates the air. Omega seduces the CEO. Omega destabilizes corporate leadership. The weapon would not be a gun, it would be a story. And stories killed reputations, careers, and bodies when the wrong people told them. The plan required Evan to choose openly, to stop pretending he was temporary, to accept that Leo's nervous system had already placed him in a role that did not come with a contract exit clause. The moment that forced the decision arrived without warning. A notification appeared on Evan's phone from a private number, no name, no context, just a short video attachment and 2 words as caption. We know. Evan's blood went cold as the clip loaded. The footage was blurred, shot from distance. The safe house building, the entrance, the street corner. And then Evan's figure captured for a second, stepping outside, head down, moving like the world had no right to look at him. The angle suggested someone watching from a parked car or a shadowed doorway. They had tracked him, not just the board's lawyers, not just corporate security. Someone on the street-level layer of chaos using the riot as cover, hunting with the kind of confidence that meant they had backing. The city unrest was no longer just noise. It was a hunting ground. Evan was not pregnant, not in this story, but he carried a different vulnerability that had shaped his entire existence. Scent, biology, the way power treated omega bodies as leverage. One public accusation could destroy him, one manufactured claim could turn him into a criminal in the public imagination, and once he was branded, no safe house would stay safe for long. Damien saw the message and understood immediately. He did not ask questions. He did not waste time on disbelief. His eyes hardened into that older darkness Evan had glimpsed when the board's betrayal became proof. This was part of the extraction. If they could not take Leo cleanly, they could poison Evan first. Make him illegitimate. Make him the problem. Make the child's attachment to him look like evidence of manipulation instead of evidence of trauma and safety. That way, removing Evan would feel justified to outsiders. Damien offered Evan a way out, a quiet exit, money, a new identity, a location off-grid, a route that would separate Evan from the danger before the narrative could catch and spread. It was the kind of offer that would have saved Evan a year ago, back when his greatest fear was being trapped in the wrong meeting with the wrong alpha. Damien's voice stayed controlled when he delivered it, almost clinical, as if providing a safety option to an asset. But Evan heard something under it, not generosity, fear, because Damien knew what this meant. If Evan stayed, he would become a target. If Evan left, Leo would break. Leo sensed the tension before any adult explained it. The child's body shifted, alert, tracking the temperature of the room. He climbed closer, reached for Evan's hand, and held on with a grip that did not belong to a casual bond. Small fingers tightening hard, as if the child was anchoring himself to the only thing in the room that felt stable. Leo's eyes did not cry. They pleaded without words. Evan felt a familiar ache open in his chest, a memory written into his nervous system. The ache of being left. The ache of learning that safety disappeared when you needed it most. The ache of doors that closed and never opened again. He looked at Leo's hand wrapped around his finger and understood the truth in a clean, brutal line. If he left now, Leo would fracture, not metaphorically, neurologically. The child's body would learn the worst lesson, that trust is temporary and the adults who make you feel safe always vanish. Evan made his choice. He stayed, not because Damien asked, not because money or fear, because Leo had already given him a role that could not be resigned from, like a job. A role written in breath and heartbeat, and the way a child fell asleep only when Evan was close. Damien's eyes changed when Evan stayed. The machine became a man for a second, and the expression was so raw it looked almost like pain. He did not thank Evan. He did not soften into sentiment, but something inside him reoriented, as if he had just accepted that his survival plan needed to include more than locks and weapons. They executed the escape that night. No lights, no phones, no mistakes. They moved through backstairs and service corridors, using routes that avoided predictable exits. Damien guided them like he could see the building's hidden skeleton in his mind. Another armored vehicle waited, unmarked, engine already running, driver already ready. Evan carried Leo, keeping the child close, feeling his small breath against his neck like a fragile promise. Behind them, the company began to burn, not literally, not with flames visible against the night sky, but structurally. Contracts collapsing under locked accounts, trust evaporating, the board's clean mask cracking as evidence moved toward daylight, the fortress turning against itself. Evan watched the city fade behind tinted glass and felt the last threads of his old life snap quietly inside him. Whatever came next would be dangerous, but it would be chosen. They did not go somewhere glamorous. They went somewhere quiet, the kind of place that did not care about CEO names or stock tickers, where a man could buy groceries without being recognized, and an Omega could walk down a street without feeling eyes measure him like a rumor. It was a coastal town that smelled like salt and wet stone, where the wind carried the sound of distant gulls, and the sea kept time with a steady rhythm that did not change for anyone's crisis. Damien rented a small house with thick curtains and a fenced yard. It was not a mansion, it was not a fortress. It was a place chosen for anonymity and distance, for the simple fact that it had fewer angles for enemies to approach. The rooms were modest, the furniture plain, the walls not decorated with wealth. The safety came from being unremarkable. It could become a home if someone decided to live in it honestly. The first weeks were not romantic. They were raw, stripped down to survival in a new shape. The riot had faded into news footage, but its consequences still lived in their bodies. The board's reach still existed like an invisible hand, and the habits formed under pressure did not disappear just because the air now smelled like ocean instead of smoke. Damien struggled with the absence of power. Without the company, without the building, without a panic room designed to obey his codes, he had to face the thing he had avoided for years. Safety built only on control eventually collapsed. He had been trained to think in barriers, locks, protocols, and leverage. Now he had a child who did not need another lock. Leo needed an adult whose presence did not feel like a weapon. Damien had to learn how to protect without hardening. It showed in small failures. The way he tensed when a car slowed too long near the house. The way his gaze automatically tracked windows and exits, calculating distance, imagining threats. The way he checked his phone even when there was no signal worth checking, as if reaching for control could summon it back. At night he stayed awake longer than he admitted, listening to the quiet and treating silence like a suspicious noise. Evan struggled too. His body kept expecting betrayal the way lungs expected air. He woke at small sounds, heart racing before his mind could name why. He checked locks unconsciously, hands moving without permission. He monitored Damien's mood the way he had once monitored every alpha around him, reading microshifts in posture and scent as if they were weather warnings. Trauma did not disappear just because the city changed. It only learned new rooms. There were mornings Evan stood at the sink, staring at the steam rising from a cup, and felt his hands shake with delayed adrenaline. He would steady himself by counting small tasks: wash, rinse, wipe, breathe. He learned quickly that he was not only soothing Leo, he was trying to rewire himself too. Leo, however, began to soften. The change was slow, almost shy. At first, he still moved like the world could turn sharp at any second. He kept his toy close. He watched doors and corners the way adults watched bank statements. He listened to voices through the thin filter of fear. But in the coastal quiet, with no sirens screaming above, his nervous system started to accept the possibility that danger was not immediate. He slept longer. Not perfectly, but longer. He laughed quietly at small things, surprised by his own sound. He stopped flinching at every sudden noise. He began to move through rooms without scanning them first. Some nights he still woke from nightmares, breath caught, eyes wide, body trying to remember the panic room steel and the tunnel's cold. When that happened, he ran to Evan by instinct, small feet padding across the floor, and Evan would pull him close and breathe until the child's trembling eased. And then, one day, Leo carried his toy to Damien. It was not a demand. It was not desperation. It was an offering, a small bridge placed carefully in front of someone he still did not fully trust. Leo stood there, shoulders tense, holding the toy out, waiting. Damien accepted the moment with careful reverence, like a man who did not trust himself with fragile things. He did not grab. He did not insist. He sat down on the floor and let Leo decide the distance. He kept his breathing slow and low, the way he had learned to copy from Evan, as if calm was a language he was finally learning at the age he should have known it. Leo climbed into his lap in increments. First, a lean, then a brief sit. Then, eventually, the full weight of a child who dared to believe he would not be pushed away. Evan watched Damien's hands at those moments. They were not the hands of a businessman negotiating control. They were hands learning gentleness, like a new discipline. Damien's fear still existed, but he stopped sharpening it into coldness. He learned to breathe through it instead, to let it pass without turning it into a blade that cut his own child. The outside world did not vanish. The board fought back with legal attacks, media narratives, pressure on allies. Headlines tried to frame Damien as unstable, Evan as an opportunist, Leo as a protected asset stolen from proper custody. The narrative weapon kept swinging, searching for a place to land. But Damien had released enough evidence to make the cleanest options impossible. It did not destroy the board completely, but it stripped them of their ability to quietly erase people. It forced consequences into daylight. Damien did not win in a heroic sense. He survived, and surviving was its own kind of victory when the enemy's favorite tool was disappearance. Evan became more than a secretary, not through a job title, but through what the house needed. He became the adult who held the center steady, the one who kept routines simple, who cooked what Leo could eat, who learned what noises triggered him and what smells soothed him. Evan became the person who could sit between Leo's fear and Damien's instincts and translate both into something gentler. He became the one who reminded Damien that showing up mattered more than controlling outcomes. Over time, Evan stopped thinking of himself as temporary. The shift into love was quiet, not explosive, not shaped like dramatic confession. It came in small sequences that felt almost too ordinary to name, which was exactly why they mattered. Damien handing Evan a cup of tea in the early hours without looking away, as if trust required eye contact. Damien covering Evan with a blanket when Evan fell asleep on the couch after a night of Leo's nightmares, the gesture careful, almost hesitant, as if kindness still felt dangerous. Damien's hand brushing Evan's fingers when they both reached for the same glass, then staying there, not taking, just holding. A new kind of bond formed, built not on dominance or rescue fantasies, but on shared survival and the choice to remain present when it hurt. One evening the wind rattled the fence and Leo startled awake, running into the living room with his toy clutched tight. Evan sat him down, breathed with him, soothed him. Damien knelt nearby, not hovering, not commanding, just present. Leo glanced between them, then leaned into Damien's shoulder for the first time without hesitation. Damien's eyes closed briefly, and in that moment the CEO disappeared. What remained was a father who had finally earned the right to be a place of safety. Evan felt the truth settle in his chest with a calm he did not recognize at first. This family was not built out of contracts, biology, or corporate power. It was built under lockdown, in the space where doors had closed and forced them to see what they really were to each other. And when the world tried to rewrite them into a scandal, what held was not reputation. It was the simple, stubborn fact that Leo slept better when both adults were near, that his laughter returned in a house that had no panic room, only people who chose to be steady. If someone listened closely, they could hear what the story had always been about, not the riot, not the board, not the company burning behind tinted glass. It was about what happened when the door locked and they finally stopped running from the roles their hearts had already assigned. Tell me in the comments whose transformation hit you the hardest. Evan, who stopped trying to disappear, Damien, who learned softness without losing strength, or Leo, who chose trust after fear. And do not forget to like and subscribe so you do not miss the next Forbidden.